But I think it's important that even as we may not be able to gather as a church to celebrate the Holy Mass all together, physically, that we can still cultivate a kind of Eucharistic attitude to food and to eating and to indeed what Christ wills to make us into in the way that we treat our family meals, in the way that we gather at table. Welcome back to Closing the Social Distance, this time for episode 14. Today, Father Clement and I are talking about food, which, for two larger gentlemen, is certainly a much beloved subject.
We're very good at food.
Absolutely. This is an expertise, so listen up, folks. In point of fact, food is more than fuel. And I think during these kind of strange times where we're all cooped up with our families, in our communities, in our houses, it's good to be reminded of this, that what we put into our bodies is not just about the nutrition, but it's about the civilization in a certain sense, the reality.
The experience of eating is almost more important than the food itself.
It's true, almost.
Well, I mean, you see this in the discussion of the heavenly banquet, right?
Yes.
Because we don't need to eat in heaven. There's no need to be having food because there's no need for nourishment. There's not this tendency towards corruption. So why is heaven described being like a banquet? Well, It's not because of the sumptuous food, it's because of the whole experience of what a banquet is.
The conviviality, the coming together, the sharing, the sense of being united around the table. As the wedding feast of the Lamb. It is the fulfillment of our Eucharistic hopes, which we experience now, in the liturgy, and even in ways that we experience in our tables, in our refectories and our kitchens and dining rooms.
Yeah, and I think, if our idea of a meal, if our idea of eating is like chewing on a bar or, eating Soylent or something like that, I think we miss out on what the nourishment of the Eucharist is, like what nourishment means, because there's a reason why we normally receive Holy Communion, or we normally experience the Eucharist in the context of this full celebration of Mass, because it's a whole experience of being at the heavenly banquet, of being at the sacrifice, not just
it's not a drive-through. There's not a heavenly McDonald's that we want to cultivate. It is a heavenly banquet, oh sacred banquet, in which Christ becomes our food, like that profound sense of being at table with our Lord,
This is what, we've received. We're providing viaticum for, souls who are on the doorstep of death, but we've declined a number of requests for people just to come by and receive communion during this period of no masses, because that's just not the context in which we're meant to receive communion.
This is a real suffering for countless people. There's no denying. Everyone suffers, and we're suffering too, because as priests, this is what we're ordained to do, is to nourish people with heavenly bread, and to give them that access to the heavenly banquet, even now, here on earth. But there's a real suffering that comes from that. But I think it's important that even as we may not be able to gather as a church to celebrate the Holy Mass all together, physically, that we can still cultivate a kind of Eucharistic attitude to food and to eating and to indeed what Christ wills to make us into in the way that we treat our family meals, in the way that we gather at table at home.
Enjoying the being together.
I'm a big partisan, and I've become more of a partisan since entering the order, for the formal meal. Put out the silverware, set the table, turn the TV off, make it into a meal. First of all, because it's demanding, it's difficult, and especially with young kids, especially with different palates and different attention spans, and everyone's tired and they're coming and going, it's difficult. But now perhaps is a good time to cultivate this virtue, to get in this good habit. Here in the Dominican Priory, we always have a formal meal at the end of the day. Dinner is always a formal served meal. The table is set. novices take turns serving. There's usually a reading done, but on feasts and special occasions, we'll have a talking meal. And I think that is so important, because food is not just for the body. We're nourished by the sacred truth, which we hear in the reading, by each other's company, and by that shared willingness to form a communion around the table, which makes us one. It's what unites us. Not as much as the Mass or as our common baptism or as our profession, but it does unite us, and it's a way of kind of living that out continuously.
Not just eating on our own, not just thinking of food as fuel for the body, but experiencing the nourishment of the unity of what's going on there.
Now, you and I both love nice restaurants. A good meal out is a great pleasure, and all the more so when it's at some place where they really know what they're doing. And I like to think of the fact that people treat that as special is more than simply they're tickling their palates or they're getting really good food. It's because the meal, this kind of a sacred event, a gathering, is treated with the kind of ritual and with the kind of elegance that it's meant to have. I don't necessarily always mean white tablecloths and candles, but I mean, notice that there's a kind of liturgical or ritual movement to being at a restaurant. The waiter comes, offers you the menu, the water is poured, the wine is open, there's the bread is put on the table. There's a kind of movement throughout, a pacing, a sense of the nobility and the beauty of what we're doing. And whether you dine out every week or whether it happens only once a year, that can be instructive. It can form us in how we treat eating and meals the rest of the time.
This ritual, this kind of the steps that we take, they aren't so much tra-la-la. They're a way of showing an attentiveness and a way of slowing things down, and a way of giving it more space for something else, a way of aspiring to another thing.
We'd be irresponsible right now, Father Clement, if we didn't mention Babette's Feast, just because it's always listed in these kind of conversations as a great Catholic movie. In the sense of its underlying message. It's whether you've seen it or not, you might look it up. If you have time to watch a movie these days, Babette's Feast is a great candidate for it.
How expensive it is.
Yeah, that's true. Unfortunately, that is true. But basically, to not give away all the details, Babette's Feast is about showing the importance of a beautiful meal. It's an occasion which makes us more human, which brings out and helps us to flourish. It brings out the best in us, both when we offer ourselves most fully, when those who are preparing it put their love and their whole selves into it, and when we enjoy the goodness that God has given, both on the table and those seated around it. And I think that's a profound truth which we need to cultivate and respect.
Yeah. And so one thing, in order to watch TV around in this house, oftentimes one has to watch home and garden television, because that's what some other friars enjoy watching. And one thing that I've noticed that I find absolutely infuriating is that every time one of these newfangled renovationists runs across a perfectly good dining room,
they knock it down.
They knock it down. It's like, no, save the dining room. Because, there's something about the reality of the way that we would use the space more if it was just in the kitchen and you could just kind of like come and go. But there's also a way that creates this helter-skelter like mindscape.
Yes.
Whereby, the preparation and the cook and the eating are not in any way distinct, and where life is just kind of constantly flowing. That having this dining room, this wasted space that you only use
twice a year, maybe,
or hopefully every day, but
Indeed.
Or at least on Sundays, right? A space that's set aside whereby, okay, we're putting out the outside world, we're putting out convenience, we're going to be here.
I think this is really important, not because it's meant to be a judgment on families that are struggling just to even get everybody around the table at the same time, let alone make it into a big thing. We know that people come from all sorts of different places and with all sorts of different crazy demands. And especially with kids, this is really tough. But there are some good practical things that you could try to do, especially during this difficult time, to help cultivate the good things that come from having a Eucharistic approach to enjoying a meal. So whether it's just putting cell phones away and not having cell phones at the table, or turning the TV off, or moving it into the dining room, even if only on those kind of special occasions, on Sundays or special days. And to view the meal not just as a production to get through, but as a time where everybody brings something. They bring themselves, if nothing else, and they bring that charity and that willingness to know the other and to be with the other. And that's, I think, something that parents, it's good to talk with kids about, and to teach them that is something that is more than just table manners. It's it's charity, know?
And like so many other things, you don't want to let, that we've been talking about, you don't want to let this idealized vision get in the way of progressing towards the ideal, or being towards the ideal. Like, don't say, okay, I don't own white tie and tails, therefore I can never dine formally.
Yeah. Therefore, unless my kids suddenly become magically perfect and never messy and never talkative, and my one daughter doesn't want, is on her cell phone, and my husband's getting up to do some work or something. It's like, it's always going to be imperfect, and it's always going to be a little messy, because human beings are messy. But there is a real good to inculcating intentionally that sense of love for the shared table. And it's something that even as many people are separated from the Mass right now, they can cultivate that Eucharistic sensibility by making their domestic church, their family table, their family time together at a meal, more and more reflective of that. And I think that's something worth toasting to.